There is a moment, somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan in the winter of 2001, where a Delta Force operator watched a British SAS trooper do something so casually violent and so precisely executed that the American, a man who had spent the better part of a decade training to be one of the most dangerous people on Earth, quietly turned to the man next to him and said, and I am paraphrasing here, "What in the hell was that?" This is the story of what happens when America's finest go to work alongside Britain's finest. And the answer, more often than not, is that everyone goes home having learned something. Hi, my name is Arnold, and this is Delta Force Chronicles. Two tribes. To understand the reaction, you first have to understand the gap. It is a cultural gap, as much as it is a tactical one. The United States military builds its special operations forces the way America builds most things: big, well-resourced, and with an enormous amount of institutional infrastructure behind them. Delta Force, formerly known as the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, was stood up in 1977 by Colonel Charlie Beckwith, after a long and occasionally infuriating attempt to convince the U.S. Army that it needed something new. Delta's selection and training pipeline is brutal, methodical, and designed to produce operators who are equally at home, kicking a door in Baghdad, as they are sitting in a ditch in rural Colombia, doing nothing for 6 days. The Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6 or DevGRU, occupies a similar tier on the Navy side. Both units draw from a superpower's talent pool. Both have access to equipment and budget that most countries' entire military establishments could not match. The British SAS operates on a different philosophy entirely. The regiment was born in the Western Desert in 1941 from the mind of a man named David Sterling, who believed that a small group of highly autonomous, highly skilled individuals could do damage out of all proportion to their size. The selection process at Hereford, the regiment's home in the Welsh borders, is legendarily brutal. Not because it demands physical superiority, though it does, but because it selects specifically for self-reliance, navigation, and the ability to function under conditions of extreme stress with minimal guidance. An SAS trooper is expected to make decisions. He is not expected to wait for orders. This distinction matters enormously when the two cultures collide on a shared objective. American units, particularly in the early days of joint operations, tended toward highly synchronized communications-heavy assaults. The British tended toward what one U.S. operator later described, not unkindly, as controlled chaos. Maximum aggression, minimum ceremony. The Americans had more gear. The British had more latitude. Watching the two work together for the first time was, by multiple accounts, simultaneously impressive and slightly unnerving for everyone involved. The exchange programs, how it all started. The relationship did not begin in a firefight. It began, as most important military relationships do, quietly and without fanfare, in the 1970s. During this period, SAS and its maritime counterpart, the Special Boat Service, entered into formal exchange arrangements with their American equivalents, the U.S. Army Special Forces and the U.S. Navy SEALs. The arrangement was straightforward. British operators would spend time with American units. American operators would come to Hereford, and both sides would learn from each other. Or at least, that was the theory. What actually happened was more consequential. It was during one of these exchange postings that Colonel Charlie Beckwith, the man who would go on to found Delta Force, spent time attached to SAS. What he saw in Hereford shaped everything that followed. The selection philosophy, the emphasis on individual capability over unit conformity, the expectation that every man in the regiment needed to be able to operate alone if required. Beckwith took all of it back with him to Fort Bragg, and he used it as the blueprint for his new unit. Equally significant was the man who went with him. Dick Meadows, a legendary Special Forces soldier with a decorated career going back to Vietnam, accompanied Beckwith on that posting to Hereford and would later become a central figure in some of the most consequential covert operations of the 1970s and 80s, including a near-mythical role in the attempted rescue of American hostages in Iran. The bond forged during those exchange years was not simply professional, it was something closer to fraternal. Two elite cultures recognizing something of themselves in each other and deciding more or less informally that the relationship was worth preserving. The DNA of the SAS ran through Delta Force from day one. This meant that when operators from both units eventually found themselves on the same objective decades later, there was already a shared vocabulary in place, even if neither side would always admit it. The Falklands factor. Reputation arrived before the men did. By the early 1980s, the SAS had done two things that permanently altered how American Special Operations personnel thought about their British counterparts. The first was the Iranian embassy siege in 1980. On the 5th of May 1980, SAS operators from B Squadron abseiled down the front of the Iranian embassy on Prince's Gate in London and assaulted a building held by 6 armed gunmen who had 19 hostages inside. The operation took 17 minutes. 5 of the 6 hostage takers were killed. 1 hostage died. Every other hostage survived. The entire operation was broadcast live on British television. It is still studied in close quarters battle training programs around the world today. The second was the Falklands War in 1982. During the campaign to retake the Falkland Islands from Argentine forces, SAS and SBS units conducted deep reconnaissance, raided airfields in South Georgia, and called in airstrikes that shaped the strategic picture of the campaign. The operations were not widely publicized at the time, but the details eventually leaked into the wider special operations community, where they were received with considerable interest. By the time American operators began working alongside the SAS in earnest, the reputation preceded the regiment by some distance. Delta operators who had been through the exchange program knew the culture. Those who had not had been told the stories. And while elite soldiers are professionally skeptical of reputation, because reputation, as any operator will tell you, has a habit of outlasting the performance that created it, what they found when they actually went to work alongside the SAS was that the stories were, if anything, understated. The regiment was exactly what its reputation suggested it was, which, depending on your perspective, is either reassuring or slightly irritating. I would argue it was probably a bit of both. Desert Storm and the Scud Hunt Operation Desert Storm in 1991 gave US and British Special Forces their first major shared theater of operations in the modern era, and it produced a set of interactions that would define the relationship for the decade that followed. The strategic problem was straightforward if not simple to solve. Saddam Hussein's military possessed mobile Scud missile launchers, highly maneuverable, difficult to locate from the air, and capable of reaching Israel. If Israel was drawn into the conflict by Scud strikes, the political coalition that underpinned the entire operation could collapse. The Scuds had to be found, and they had to be destroyed. And because they were mobile and hidden across a vast desert landscape, this was not a job for conventional forces. It was a job for small teams operating deep inside Iraqi territory, living off the land, calling in airstrikes and staying ahead of Iraqi search patrols for days at a time. The SAS deployed multiple patrols deep into western Iraq. The most famous of these, Bravo 20, has entered military legend for a combination of tactical misfortune, extraordinary individual endurance, and the kind of operational chaos that tends to produce both court-martials and Victoria Crosses, depending on which end of it you happen to be standing. But Bravo 20 was not the only patrol, and not all of them ended in disaster. Several conducted extended operations in appalling conditions, located Scud launchers, called in successful strikes, and extracted without catastrophic loss. U.S. Special Forces teams operating in the same region watched what the SAS were doing and drew their own conclusions. The phrase that entered circulation among American operators during Desert Storm and which is documented in multiple after-action assessments and personal accounts from the period, was something along the lines of this: "These guys are absolute beasts." It was not said dismissively. It was said the way operators say it when they genuinely mean it, with a degree of professional respect that does not come cheaply in that community. The SAS were doing what SAS patrols have always done, operating with minimal support, maximum aggression, and a tolerance for ambiguity that the institutional US military was still, in 1991, in the process of developing at the Tier 1 level. American commanders watching the British operate firsthand came away from the Gulf War with a clear-eyed appreciation that the partnership they had inherited from the exchange programs of the 1970s was worth taking seriously. Afghanistan, side by side, in the mountains. If Desert Storm established mutual respect, Afghanistan forged something harder. In the weeks and months following the September 11 attacks, Special Operations Forces from both nations found themselves operating in the same mountainous, freezing, and extraordinarily unforgiving landscape. The SAS, operating under the designation Task Force Hades, deployed to Afghanistan in late 2001 alongside Delta Force, DVG, RU, and what was becoming an increasingly integrated JSOC structure. They were hunting Taliban leadership, disrupting command networks, and providing the intelligence backbone for a campaign that was, at least in its early phase, built almost entirely around small teams and air power rather than large conventional forces. Operation Anaconda in early 2002 provides perhaps the clearest illustration of what joint US and British operations looked like at that stage. The battle in the Shah-e-Kot Valley in eastern Afghanistan was intended as a rapid operation to destroy remaining Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters. It became something considerably more complicated. The enemy were better positioned, better armed, and more numerous than intelligence had suggested. Conventional units from the 10th Mountain Division and the 101st Airborne took casualties. Special operations forces from multiple nations found themselves operating under intense fire in terrain that favored the defender. SAS and Delta operators working together in those conditions did not have time for the kind of careful procedural integration that joint training is supposed to provide. They adapted on the fly. What emerged from Anaconda and the wider Afghanistan campaign was a working rhythm between British and American Tier 1 forces that had been earned rather than designed. Operators learned each other's radio procedures, call signs, and movement techniques through necessity rather than through planning. British troopers noted that their American counterparts had access to ISR platforms, fire support assets, and logistical infrastructure that the SAS could only dream about. American operators noted that the SAS operated with a degree of individual initiative under contact that still occasionally surprised them. The sum of those two observations produced something more capable than either unit was alone. One Delta operator, speaking years later on condition of anonymity, described watching an SAS trooper during a complex ambush break contact identify a flanking route through terrain that the American said he genuinely had not seen, exploit it without being told to, and collapse the ambush from a direction that nobody had planned for. He said it was one of the most instinctive pieces of tactical decision-making he had ever seen in the field. High praise from a man whose day job was being one of the most tactically proficient soldiers on Earth. Iraq, the industrial counterterrorism machine. If Afghanistan was where the relationship was forged, Iraq between 2004 and 2008 was where it was tested at industrial scale. General Stanley McChrystal, who commanded JSOC during the critical years of the Iraq insurgency, had a strategic problem that was essentially a targeting problem at enormous volume. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, under the leadership of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, had built a network that was simultaneously hierarchical and dispersed, a structure that conventional intelligence and conventional operations were struggling to disrupt effectively. McChrystal's answer was to build what he described as a network to defeat a network. Instead of planning individual raids weeks in advance, JSOC units would conduct multiple raids per night, using intelligence gathered on each raid to generate targets for the next one. The tempo was staggering, and it required all available Tier 1 assets, American and British, operating as a genuinely integrated force rather than as a coalition of national units doing their own thing. The SAS, operating under Task Force Black with headquarters in Baghdad, integrated directly into this cycle. British operators were assigned to target packages alongside Delta Force, which was operating as Task Force Green. The two units shared intelligence feeds, shared target development work, and in some cases, shared objectives. The nightly raid tempo during the peak of the Iraq campaign reached levels that were, by the accounts of everyone involved, physically and mentally extraordinary. Multiple raids per night, every night, for months at a stretch. What the Americans observed during this period was that the SAS adapted to the industrial tempo without losing the qualities that made them effective at lower volumes. The flexibility that the regiment had demonstrated in the Falklands and in Afghanistan, the ability to make decisions, to adjust, to exploit opportunities that had not been planned for, survived the transition to a high-volume industrial targeting environment. That was not a given. Some units lose their edge under that kind of sustained operational pressure. The SAS, by the accounts of the American operators they worked alongside, did not. McChrystal himself has been characteristically measured in his public comments about the British contribution, but the operational record of the Iraq campaign, the targeting successes, the network disruption, the eventual killing of al-Zarqawi in June 2006 reflects a degree of joint operational effectiveness that speaks for itself. Task Force Black and Task Force Green produced results that neither unit would have produced alone. What the Americans actually said, the accounts, where they exist on the record, are consistent. Retired U.S. Army General Del Daly, who commanded JSOC in early 2002 in Afghanistan, described the British Special Forces contribution as essential and stated that the integration of SAS and American Tier 1 units was among the most effective Allied arrangements he had seen in his career. Retired Admiral William McRaven, who commanded JSOC from 2011 to 2014 and oversaw Operation Neptune Spear, the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, has repeatedly described the U.S. and British Special Operations partnership as the deepest and most effective bilateral relationship in the special operations world. That is not diplomatic language. McRaven does not traffic in diplomatic language. Off the record, the assessments are less formal and more visceral. Multiple American operators who served alongside the SAS in both Afghanistan and Iraq have described watching British troopers in contact and coming away with the same recurring observation that the SAS operated under fire with a quality one operator described as organized aggression. That means aggression that was not random, but precisely directed, maintained under pressure, and never crossed the line into recklessness. For an operator, that is about the highest compliment available. The reverse is also true. SAS veterans who served alongside Delta and DevGru have been consistent in their admiration for the American capacity to project force at scale, the ISR platforms, the direct action assets, the logistics, the fires. One veteran described working alongside Delta as operating inside the most powerful special operations machine ever built, and meant it as a compliment rather than a criticism. From the deserts of western Iraq to the mountains of Kunar province, from the exchange programs of the 1970s to the nightly raid cycles of the mid-2010s, the relationship between American and British Tier 1 forces has produced a body of shared operational experience that is, in the history of elite soldiering, essentially without precedent. Two units, different in philosophy, similar in standard, and shaped by 50 years of shared objectives, shared intelligence, and a mutual recognition that what the other side brings to the fight is worth taking seriously. The intelligence support activity mapped the battle space. Delta kicked the doors. DevGru hit the maritime targets. And somewhere in the stack, on nearly every significant operation of the last 4 decades, there was an SAS or SBS trooper who had parachuted in from somewhere, navigated across terrain that would have stopped most people cold, and was standing on the objective, before anyone had quite registered how he had got there. Absolute beasts. Both sides said it about each other. Both sides meant it. Please like and subscribe for more content. Thank you for watching.